What's the topic today, Stephanie?
Okay. Talking about eating at night, but not night eating, evening eating,
Was
as
that
you would.
Canadian?
I don't know.
Oh, right.
It's Canadian, hey.
It was
We're
the about. The
about
about.
yeah, we're talking about like the evening time and eating, feeling like that's when like the eating habits come up or the appetite rises, or I suppose we'll go into all the different ways that does show up because I have lots to say about that based on
Mhm.
a comment that came up in a different episode that we did about evening eating. But yeah, eating at night, eating in the evening, eating after dinner.
Yes. I'm glad you got lots to say about it because we're about to record a podcast episode on it. And is that a Stanley Cup, Steph?
No, I won't
Oh,
do
I
it.
saw an S.
Just swell.
Okay.
Because Stanley Cups are getting to me. I'm like, no, I refuse now. I refuse because
Yeah,
everyone's
isn't
so
it
obsessed
making
with
the
them.
rebel come out in you as well?
Yeah, I'm like,
I'm
no.
just like, no, if everyone wants it, I don't want it. But yeah.
Yes. And I have the conversation with my daughter all the time, and she's like, Mom, because she wants all the Stanleys. And I'm like, "Ugh." And she's like, Mom, gosh, you always have to make it about that. Which I do. So I'm trying to back off. But yeah, for myself, no, I don't have a Stanley.
Well, I'm glad we got that out of the way. And for people listening on the podcast, we are streaming this episode live to our community group. So we're joined by some of our community members throughout the episode. And if you would like to join our community, check out the links below and come over and join us. Why not?
Why not? Why
Why
not?
not? That's genuinely how I want to market stuff. I just want to go like, this is what I'm offering. Why not? Why not? Why not sign up to
Um,
this thing?
Part of the perks you get are discounts on things
Like events, live events. So Steph is coming over to the UK in May, and I've got her for a whole week. But you guys can have her for two occasions in that whole week. On Monday, the 20th of May, we are going to be in Brighton doing an evening talks and Q&A with Marcus Kane from Strong Not Starving podcast. He came on our podcast. We've been on his podcast. We really resonate with his message. And he also brings quite a unique lens to our message. I can finish the sentence, trust me, to our message that is something extra than what we can bring because his background is in nutrition and training.
So we're going to be hanging out with him on Monday in Brighton, apparently.
Yes.
And on
And on
Thursday,
Thursday, the 23rd of May, we are going to be doing a day retreat on Bournemouth Beach. So we're going to be hanging out for the whole day. We've got a great room down there with a beautiful aspect right over a sandy beach. And we're kind of looking at it through the lens of nervous system reset. So we've done workshops before, which are great, but I don't even like the word workshops very much because it's like, come and do some work, come and work on yourself. Whereas the nervous system reset is more about coming and connecting and a bit of self-reflection, but not in that whole we need to improve ourselves way, right?
Yeah, right. We're gonna be playing in sand.
We
We're gonna
are.
have fun.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So why don't we just begin? Because we have such a hard time with this. What are your experiences with evening eating, Sarah?
Oh, evening was my time. Evening was my time. In the worst of it, I can remember going to bed. What felt like my memory of it is being every single night so full that sleeping was difficult. And I would feel very optimistic in the mornings. I would tend to have that fresh slate thinking, okay, it's a new day. Maybe today is the day that I just fundamentally change all my behaviors around food. And then when it wasn't, it felt like this gradual decline throughout the day. So evenings, I can definitely relate to. There was also a time, especially very early on in my binging, where it was all day, where there was very little differentiation between morning and evening. So I think I've had both experience, but certainly in the latter 80% of my disordered eating experiences, it was evening times would have been harder. And I think this is such a popular topic. And one of the reasons when you suggested this, I jumped on it was because I released a YouTube video last week about this very subject, and it's done better than potentially all my videos put together on YouTube. So it's a popular subject. It's
Yeah.
got over 100,000 views in a week, which goes to show just how many people are concerned because they feel like this is a problem. I'm struggling to control my eating in the evening.
I didn't actually watch your video on purpose. It might have been preparatory because I didn't want it to influence my thinking in any way. So I'm not sure if you covered this thing. I'm sure you did. But I feel like this conversation, there's nuances to it. I have lots in my head right now. But before I run off in that direction, I feel like there is a very basic foundational angle of this to look at. Which you can probably guess that is one of the most common predictors of why we get that sort of food obsessy, I can't contain the urges anymore in the evening as opposed to earlier in the day. Can you guess what I might say?
Ooh, are you going to say habit? Is that the one you were going to
No.
say?
Oh, it's like,
Did you
Sarah.
think I was being serious?
Yes, I did.
No, it's going to be exactly the very first point I made on my video. Should we say it at the same time?
Yeah. 1, 2, 3. Restriction.
Eating
in
enough
the day.
during the day.
Blah, 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 blah. Yeah. Because of what you said, right? You wake up, no matter what's gone on the day before. It's like we have such high hopes in the morning and we have a lot of motivation to either to restrict, because there were mornings I woke up and I was like planning to restrict, or just simply, I want to do better today. I want to take care of myself today. I want to eat normally today, which sounds viable. Like that isn't inherently bad. But for me, and I think many people's experience, that slides into restriction very easily and insidiously. So I might wake up and have like a healthy breakfast. Now, my idea of what a healthy breakfast was also like, it's not just what you eat, but it's how much you eat. And I feel like I would eat enough, but what I thought was enough and what like was proper. You know, this idea of what enough wasn't actually my enough. So it didn't necessarily look like restriction. It might have looked like the way the magazines will. I mean, I looked at what was the magazine I was looking at the other day, and I saw it was online and it was giving like a day menu. It was a cooking magazine of some sort. And the total calories was 12 to 1600 still. I didn't think they were still doing that. So I would have gone, or, you know, with something like that of eating a breakfast that would have matched up with what a magazine told me to do, which would have seemed reasonable to me. And then I would have held out and had like a lunch. And then I would, and essentially like sort of like gradually more and more walking a tightrope for the entire day, making sure I was doing the right thing, which didn't really leave any room for spontaneity, flexibility, or the amount of hunger that I had in my body. And so by the time the night would come, my ghrelin would have, and I know you like to talk about ghrelin, but it would have collected and I would have been sitting there at night like, oh my gosh, my body is like, I am starving now. I'm really, really hungry. Go eat, which actually that makes sense to me now. But at the time it would have been like, my darn body, you know, like my darn appetite, it just won't let me catch a break. And I would have ended up binging in the nighttime because I hadn't eaten enough essentially during the day, even if that enough would have been propagated by different lifestyle recommendations out there.
Yes. And I'm sure you've heard this before as well, but people will insist that they're eating enough because they'll say things like, but I'm not hungry when I'm eating in the evenings. I'm adamant it's nothing to do with hunger. It's all emotional. I'm just tired and stressed. I'm eating my dinner and I'm full up and I know I'm not hungry because I'm full. Yeah. And that, I think, is the piece. I think the other reason as well why there's an initial pushback against it is because when you're in it, you don't want this to be true.
I know.
You don't want this to be the reason, because if this is the reason, the answer is eat more when you're less hungry, eat more when you don't really feel like it, at a time where you already feel like you're somebody who struggles with eating too much and episodes of feeling out of control around food.
It's so counterintuitive, it feels in the beginning. Absolutely. I had a post that was titled last year called, I'm going to binge anyway, so why wouldn't I restrict up until the binge? And like this idea of like, I don't want to eat in the places that I actually don't feel like eating because that's so few and far between. Like, but actually that is part of the methodology. I have that concept too called collective hunger, otherwise known as cumulative hunger, where again, you've got yes, I am acutely full from dinner, for example. I've just eaten dinner, so my stomach is not in fact empty. I am not in fact hungry. But if you've not eaten enough for the whole day or the whole week or the whole month or year in some case, you know, that does add up. And it creates a feeling of that extreme hunger, which is that feeling like, you know, that your stomach is full, but you want to keep eating. There is this biological impetus to keep eating, even when the stomach itself is actually not empty. That is not necessarily an absence of hunger. It's just a different type of hunger. It's overall hunger. It's collective hunger. It's cumulative hunger that is built up over time. And that's one of the most That was a pretty important concept for me in my recovery because it helped me understand. And
Hmm.
as you know, I love to understand, and it helped me feel like, oh, okay, like then my body's not just acting out. It's upset. It's upset. It's hungry.
Hmm. The other part for me would be I was always planning to restrict more the next day. It was always tomorrow I'm going to restrict more. So if I'm believing that tomorrow I'm going to fast, I'm going to whatever, I'm going to cut this out, cut that out, eat in this kind of way. When the night before comes, of course, of course I'm going to eat more that evening because tomorrow is the day that I'm going to do it all differently. And I think that was another way it would show up in the evening. Another way it would show up in the evening. Although I just want to mention Anne's question in the comments because Anne's asking, how do you know if you're eating enough during the day? She's put calories, hunger, question mark.
Either of those can be gauges, to be honest. I'm not going to recommend calorie counting. However, like even 2000 calories for me wasn't enough. I needed to be having more. And it's been recommended to me to have a minimum that's much higher just to make sure that we're eating enough. But again, it's still going to be subjective. But usually, I guess I'll say it this way. If you are eating 2000 calories or less, just because that tends to be a number that people, even that's even seems generous for some people, right? Like this is a very, recommended amount is the RDA is 2000. If you are eating that amount and you are still binging, I would look at the fact that you might not be eating enough. Everything's tricky because hunger is so hard to differentiate. But if you're having hunger, yes, like this is an indication that your body is asking for more food. I mean, I lived for 20 years trying to have 2000 calories or less, essentially, and continued to binge. And when I finally upped my number much higher than that, that's when I felt like my body was much more cooperative with me. So, I mean, again, I don't want to put numbers out there, but sometimes it's helpful just to name that.
Yeah. And I don't want to say this like a rule. I think I mentioned this in the Back to Basics series. Is one of the places I might start with somebody is, are you eating fewer than 40% of your entire energy intake before 3 p.m.? So if up to 3 o'clock you're eating less than 40% than what you're eating over the entire day, try eating a bit more earlier on.
Yeah.
And with anything like this, I think, because if there's a sense of panic about doing this is just an experiment. You're only going to carry on doing this if you're noticing a difference. You're not suddenly committed to it if you think this might be you. But could you commit to, for a period of time, trying to experiment with some of this, bringing a bit in earlier and just seeing what happens later on?
Yeah. I mean, I don't want to belabor the point because I know that there are many people who will be listening and saying, yeah. Like, or what if I'm not restricting? We do have a question here actually reflecting that. And it's not always necessarily the case that we are restricting and that's why we're eating in the evenings. It is not always the case. However, it is the case for so many more people than I think we think, or than it is assumed. I find that is one of the most underestimated things going on that is contributing to evening eating, and it bears repeating. I just will die on that hill.
Mm-hmm. Should we mention another one?
Mm-hmm.
Reward. At the time, it never occurred to me to think about it as a reward, but I know for some people it certainly does feel that way. And it's making me think about the episode we did on Dopamine Nation, where we spoke about the pleasure-pain balance. And if you're going through all your day, like you're hitting the pain, like at some point your brain is going to want to level that out. And it's one of the quickest and easiest ways to get some kind of hit of reward. Now, there's reward in the more I don't know, like there's something for me about this sense of trying to like redress the scales. And then there's a reward, which is more like chasing something. So it doesn't really work as a reward.
Say more. What do you mean?
I don't know. I was hoping you were going to pick up the baton.
Oh. I'm not. Yeah, go ahead. Keep talking.
I guess the question is it working? So there are times when people will be using food at the end of the day and it's a reward. And it really does feel like a reward. It really does feel like this kind of reset. Yeah. I love the evening times when my day is done and I get to sit down and eat some nice food. And like, I love the evening times. And there is an unwinding that happens. And it works. Well, I'm not binging and it's not looking like this anymore. But I think sometimes with the compulsive eating that is reward chasing, you never get to the reward.
Yes. Okay. It's almost like scrolling too. You know how you can get sort of hooked into the scroll, and you like, I do this still where I'm like, I want to get out of here. Like I can tell I don't want to be there anymore, but I can't get out. And that I think does have something to do with the dopamine hook. where you're chasing something for some kind of hit that appears to be about the thing, but it's
Hmm.
not about the thing. It's something happening in your brain. I'm thinking about a client I had years ago who was a single mom going through a really hard divorce and working full time at a job that she hated. And she drudged through her days. Like, and again, this is extreme. It doesn't even have to be this extreme, but she was just not happy in her day to day. But would, by the time she got home and put her child to bed, she would eat, she would binge, she would, now there was also restriction going on, but she would binge and she would say, what was interesting is she'd be like, I don't even enjoy it. I'm not getting this like hit from, of course it tastes good and that's true, but she's like, there's this feeling of like, I don't even want to be doing this. And we talked about we talked about restriction, first of all, but we also talked about how when you are like on more of this like existential level, just feeling like there isn't reward, there's not joy, there's not even time to just, and this comes around to the pressure cooker syndrome that I talk about, where it's like when you are just taking it all day long and you're just getting through and you're mechanically just putting one foot in front of the other because you have to, and you're not really enjoying any of that process. And you get home and finally, all of a sudden, like everything's done that needs to get done and all the boxes are checked off. And then you're like, oh, and there's all that steam that has built up all day of just tolerance, like tolerating all of this. And again, maybe it does have to do with something in the brain that registers food as a relief or as just simply a dopamine hit that maybe consciously isn't even getting enjoyed, but it's still doing that something, the same way that scrolling for me is still compelling for whatever reason, even when it's not fun anymore. That is happening because of the absence of that on a generalized basis, right? Like, I don't think as humans that we're supposed to be joyless. Like there must be something in our chemical makeup that is built to run on some hits of happiness or like joy. That balance is some equation in there. And that if that isn't happening, that the body will seek it. And we'll call it reward. I don't know. It doesn't have to always feel like one, but it can feel like something that was missing or that is missing generally, that's getting met by using food at night. Because also, what else might we use? I mean, is there any, it's there, it's accessible, it's easy, and it's good. It tastes good, at least in the moment. But, you know, yeah, I think that that's happening to not a small amount of people.
And if this evening eating is the only thing you have to look forward to in life, like this is the only thing I look forward to is this time, then the problem isn't the eating.
Yeah.
The problem is having a life where there are other things that you look forward to, other things that feel meaningful to you in a positive way. And when you were talking, I was thinking, sort of touched on this before anyway, but deciding to train to be a therapist for me changed so much about my life. I was going through the motions. My job was fine. I had friends, but I had nothing. I didn't have anything in my life that felt like it was my thing.
Like
This is my
compelling.
thing.
Mm-hmm.
Yes, yes. And that I think even more, it's probably not fair to say even more than the therapy I've had. Potentially not, but I don't think one would have worked without the
Yeah,
other.
I agree.
So if somebody's coming and going, well, then what do I do? I can't answer that for a person. I can't say, like, this is what you then need to do in your life so you have something to look forward to. This is really personal, individual, I guess, self-examination, life examination based on how your life is for you. And I really appreciate that, there is privilege and there's inequality. So we don't all have the same opportunities. It doesn't have to be something big like a career change or something, but it's something in your life that you're like, oh, I have this thing in my life and I feel good about that thing. It gives me something for me.
Yeah. I think it has to give you what I would call like a hook, because I had this experience too. And I agree. I think that this work itself is part of why I've said this before, is part of how I was able to recover, because it was compelling. It was compelling in a way that other things in my life that I would say are happy things didn't offer. And I'm going to say, like, motherhood was one of those. I love my children. I would die for my children. But the act of motherhood day to day isn't compelling to me in a way that this work is. So it was important that I found something. Same with like occupational therapy. I liked it, but it didn't hook me. And this hooks me. And in the same way that food had hooked me. So I do believe there's some kind of hooking that drives us in a different way than things that should be those joy providers. Like by all rights, I might have listened to this episode and said, well, motherhood is a joy. Like it provides joy. It's something that I am invested in, but not in this way that this is, and that this like makes me want to get out of bed in the morning. You know what I mean? And this, because it used to be, I would get out of the bed in the morning to eat. That was the first thing. So almost like to look for the places in life. And again, we might not have any that we're aware of right now. And I think it's about leaving the window open to find them, to let those breezes come in and be able to be aware when they do, to be open to that. But of the flow states, those times where we're getting into the zone where we're like, ooh, that's something for me. This is a thing for me. I might want to follow that trail.
Another one that I spoke about in my video is about, and we had a little voice note about this because I thought I'd plagiarized you, was the transitional eating, like making that switch from day to night. Do you know what monotropism is?
No.
So it's a word that comes up a lot in the ADHD and ASD spaces. And it's about how easy or difficult your brain finds it to switch from one thing to another thing. Because you're switching tracks, right? And it's like that even when you're in that binge cycle, you're on this track that's just going round and round. So we talk about breaking the cycle, means being able to lift yourself off that track and put yourself on another track. The harder you find that, or even just like neurotypical people as well, who just at certain times of day we feel more depleted or whatever that might be, making that shift. So let's say the typical one is going from work to evening mode at home, particularly if you work at home. So what I was suggesting in the video is that because when we eat, we change our biochemistry. Like our blood sugar rises, our bodies produce insulin. Like there's a physical change that goes on in our body at the same time that we're trying to make this psychological shift. So it can be used as a cue and a way to actually change from whatever mode we're in, because not just what we're focusing on, but the mode that we're in.
Yes.
So most people are not in the same mode at work as they are at home, as they are with their friends, as they are in the grocery store, like wherever it might be. And we're constantly switching into different parts of ourselves. And food, I was talking about it as a transitionary object. And this was one that probably got the most comments and feedback on YouTube because people hadn't heard about it in that possible way.
Yeah. I talk about that and we can talk about it from different lenses, but that's to me like the switch of the nervous system state too. Like there's a certain amount of adjusting that your system is doing when it goes from having to like work where you're more in the sympathetic part of your body where you need to accomplish, you need the adrenaline, and then you go home and it's like you switch out and you're being called back down. Same thing when you put your kids to bed. Like, oh gosh, at night it's like, and then all of a sudden everyone's in bed and you're like, but that's quite a shift. And for me, that's always been too quick. It's too quick. I have a hard time with transitions, which is why I like talking about it. And I'm not ASD or ADHD, but I do not have an easy time. It's really difficult. And that discomfort itself, food can fill a gap for, as well as serving some kind of, again, food is grounding as well. So it's got the sensory properties that help with transitions. This is a way that it's actually treated, in my experience as an OT working with kids with ADHD or on the ASD spectrum as well. Like we would use sensory tools during transitions, as well as others, by the way, as well as some cognitive strategies too. But sensory therapy is the mode of nervous system treatment for kids. I'm like, the same thing applies to me now. It's food might serve that, like, it's also rhythmic and it's like, okay, and you can sort of work your system down with that, rather than going boom to boom. We need stuff to help us. It's very grounding or it's stimulating, whichever way you need to go. And I think that's a really important, yes, transition eating, whether that's home to work, work to home, day to night, kids to bed, even, doing the dishes, doing things around your home, and just the transition up to bed, just to your bedroom, to get in bed. Sometimes people have a hard time with that. I've had clients tell me like they just sort of push it off because it's a transition.
The example I also gave, and I've spoken about this on the podcast, that transition from being around people to suddenly being on my own. that was a real uncomfortable one, because also the circumstances have caused the transition to happen. So it's not a decision. I'm not going, right, I'm transitioning from one to one. I'm choosing to go to bed. It wasn't like that. It would be I'd come home from a trip away, or I'd had a load of people around and they'd suddenly left. And that sudden on my ownness, because I'm someone who doesn't mind their own company, I'm okay being on my own, but the sudden on my ownness, the transition of that, found really uncomfortable. And that was a prime time for binging.
Yeah.
And when I started, go on.
No.
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 No, you keep talking. The only thing that I found worked was when I recognized there is a strong feeling that comes up now. I would never have thought about it as transition at the time. That wasn't the language I was using. There is a strong feeling that happens in these moments, and allowing that feeling to be felt kind of ahead of time, because if it caught me off guard, I was in something and I felt like I needed to change my state and I'd be reaching for the food. But when I was aware and I noticed the pattern more and more, I was like, okay, when I come in, I'm gonna feel some stuff.
Yeah.
When everyone leaves, I'm gonna feel some stuff. And I cannot even tell you what that feeling is. It's not sadness. It's like loss, but it's not sadness. There genuinely isn't a word for that feeling for me.
Yeah, I agree. I think that expecting it to come is so much different than it blindsiding you, or just continuing to happen and you're not really naming it.
Yes. What about when people say that they use food for entertainment? Like, because it's something to do. I just want something to do. So they're not saying it's reward. They're not saying it's transitional. They're just saying, I'm just so bored in the evening. I don't know what to do with myself, especially we're recording this where it's winter in the Northern Hemisphere. So for many of us, we have fewer daylight hours. The evenings are darker. They kind of feel shorter as well. Like time takes on a strange new, for me anyway, feels different this time of year as well. And I am going to eat more. I find I do eat more in the evenings this time of year. There's a reality to that.
Not in the evenings, but just in general. I don't know. This is because again, I want to say I identified with that a lot. I eat because I'm bored. I eat because I need something to do. And as it happens, I have a very hard time being bored. I have a very hard time being still for too long, and I do still need stuff to do. I do, but I don't need it to be food anymore. And I think that's again, any of the aforementioned things that we talked about will compound this. So I don't know that this exists in a vacuum. Like restriction was really fueling food being that thing for me, but I still need to have a thing. I don't, it's not like I'm so zen now. It's just that I don't need it to be food. And there's no urgency for it to be food. It can be a task. It just can be texting. It can be scrolling. It's the discomfort with stillness, which again, I think personally has more to do with the state of my nervous system as a baseline. So it might be that you need something to do. And it might be, and I've offered this as an assignment. In fact, I think I did this week to a client, of deciding in advance, like what is because again, when you're not restricting, when restricting is not the thing, this is where this will work. If restricting is the thing happening, it won't work. But in the absence of restriction, if you kind of decide in advance, like I know that I'm going to feel this sort of discomfort with not having anything really to do right now or to do at night, think about in advance of what it is that you could offer yourself to do, even if it doesn't have to be meaningful. It's just a task. And just to experiment with that and to see, like, does that actually help? Do you forget about food in that moment if you've got something else to occupy that energy that runs in your body, or the mental energy that needs to be put somewhere?
You used the word urgency, and that to me is the key difference. It's not the urgency around using food in that way that it was before, but I would still, just as an example, the other day I was coming home early. I knew I had quite a long evening in front of me, and I said, I just want to curl up on the sofa and I want to have my dinner, and I want something to eat on top of that. And so what I thought about, what I really wanted, I wanted an elongated eating experience. So there was no stress or panic about that. So I thought, right, okay, how do I give this to myself in a way that kind of feels okay for me? And do you have Aero Bubbles, mint bubbles chocolates?
AERO?
Yes.
I know those because of you guys, but no, we don't have
Okay, so there's chocolate mint ones. And with one of those, I can put one in my mouth and I can just leave it there and it will take forever to melt. And I have this savoring experience that I wouldn't have if I just picked up a chocolate bar and ate a chocolate bar. So I got myself like a bag of those and put it in a bowl, and I just sat and I really dragged it out. I would have one, and then a minute or two later, I would have another one, because I was so aware of what it was that I wanted from the food. And I used food to have that experience. But it's not what I'm doing every evening. And it's not that this is the only way for me to amuse myself in the evening. But another thing, I don't know if you're
amuse myself. That's funny.
Why was that
That
funny?
amused me. Sorry.
Is that not something you would say in the US? Does that
It
sound
was
really
just funny,
British?
like, I just picturing you with the chocolate amusing yourself. Amusing to me. I don't know why that was struck me.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, no, it's fine. The other one as well, I can remember. Do you know what? I think I can remember it, but I might be making this up. So just for full disclosure, as a kid complaining that I'm bored and being told, well, then go be bored.
Yeah.
And so sometimes when I think that, or I say to myself, I don't really know what to do with myself, I'll go, like, what makes you think you're supposed to know what to do with yourself? That we're supposed to be entertained all the time.
Right. I realized this being a mom, because I used to say the same thing to my mom, and she'd be like, go read a book, go da-da-da. And I was like, But now I'm like, it's okay for you to be bored. Like, that's okay to my own children. Of course, it was never okay for me, and it's still not, but go practice. Go practice being bored. I always tell my kids, it'll serve you well. I was like, if you can learn it now, trust me. I sound like my dad. Here's something else, though, that came up as I was listening to you, is judgment. So all of these things that we're talking about, like, there's ways, sometimes it makes sense. You're like, yeah, I'm bored, so I eat, or I'm bored, so I want to have an amusing, long, drawn out, sort of experience with food. What would create urgency around that, or the feeling that we can't stop, is sometimes the judgment of that. So if we're believing in our brains that this is the beginning of a binge, or like, see, I don't know how to exist without food. I'm so obsessed with food. It always has to be about food. If we're starting to pathologize it, that in and of itself can predict the rest of the binge. So it's not a problem all the time for us to use food in the evening as something other than fuel, just because we're bored, or because we need some stimulation, or because we want to zone out a little bit, or we need a reward. Like, that can exist in itself. What often I think happens is that becomes the beginning of a story. And then that story becomes a meta binge, or a meta eating experience, where it's taken on now it's happened because of the judgment. The other thing I wanted to name is to look at the environment in which we live at night. So I'm thinking too of clients who have complicated relationships with their partner, or they don't have a partner and they're single and they're living alone, and that's an issue for them. Like, I've got one client in particular, we were just talking about it this week as well, and she was saying, if I don't have plans at night and it's after dinner time and it's quiet and I'm by myself watching a show, there's something about that feels like I feel like a loser. I feel like the reason I'm alone is because no one wants to be with me. Again, there's stories with this. Or let's say there's someone with a spouse where there's an uneasy relationship, or they're feeling ignored, or they're feeling like, are we going to fight now? Like, there's certain ways in which food becomes a way of defending against that happening, or prolonging it, like procrastinating, filling a gap of loneliness, whatever the relationship dynamic is going on there. Again, this is like the bigger life things that might be happening, that food is such a salve, in so many ways. And it's a buffer. It serves so many different purposes because it's attached to so many different things, comfort, and boredom, like it's easy. It's right there, and it's something to do. Like, it's just such an easy thing to use. But I think even if it's not something you can solve in the here and now, it's still helpful to know. To me, it's helpful to clarify to myself, this is why I'm doing something. Like, this is why this makes sense here. Okay. Like, that's something for me to marinate on for a bit. That in and of itself, to me, is step one.
Yes. So there's two things that are coming to mind. One, in terms of how we judge an emotion. So, for example, in 2020, pandemic year, I spent that Christmas in quarantine. So I had 10 days over Christmas and New Year, completely on my own in a flat, not seeing anyone. So it's Christmas Day, microwave meal, Netflix, by myself. And of course, there's this whole idea of Christmas on your own as being a really sad thing. There's something about that situation that is generally thought of like that is a sad situation. But what I noticed was there was no sadness about it, because the reasons why I was on my own was for this. It wasn't because I didn't have anybody to spend Christmas with. And that's what it reminded me of that when you were talking about the loneliness thing. And I really related to that. I felt very lonely at times in my life. And it's been a while since I felt like this, but there used to be so much judgment around that loneliness, because I used to make it mean, oh, it's because I'm unlovable and no one wants me. Now, if you do that, then yes, the emotional experience is unbearable. That's an unbearable experience to feel like that. So when we don't judge our emotions and allow our emotions to be, we can have a different experience of them. I know that sounds oversimplified, but like, that's part of it. And then the other way I think we judge the emotion is we think we shouldn't feel it. We're supposed to feel happy all the time. We're supposed to be productive and getting things done. We shouldn't be bored. It's like, well, oh, maybe we kind of should.
Yeah.
So that idea, and I think this is a Brooke Castillo notion, she talks about life is 50-50. This is how she puts it, that it's 50% positive emotion and 50% negative emotion. And she divides it straight down the middle. And I think that's an interesting concept. I'm not saying I think it's as simple as that, but as a starting point, there can be a certain, I don't know, there can be relief or resistance, depends how accepting you are.
Yeah. Well, that reminds, I never heard of the 50-50. And, but I do agree that human suffering, which can come in the way of loneliness, or whatever emotion is uncomfortable, will happen to you no matter what. So if it's not about this thing, it'll be about that thing. So if you find a partner tomorrow, you will still find loneliness. Loneliness will come get you somewhere else, like maybe even inside the relationship. We feel these things, and we will feel these things. And sometimes it's helpful for me to remember, like, this is, whenever I'm uncomfortable with an emotion, it's like, this is part of the human existence, and it would exist no matter what the context. Somewhere I would feel this sometime, somewhere. And so it's more about, can I learn how to tolerate it instead of can I learn how to fix it? Because I don't think you do. But I also want to be fair, because I certainly I concede that I used to feel negative emotions way more often than I do now. Like it was 90-10, for me at one time, and it isn't anymore. So I respect also that there is room for, and perhaps we pick up on that somewhere inside ourselves. Like, I think the amount of suffering I feel is disproportionate to the amount that I could feel in life. And I used to think that. I used to know. I used to be like, I feel like I suffer disproportionately. And I know that it doesn't have to be that way. I just did. And so it was like the pursuit of wanting to shift that for myself, that was always there. It was like, how do I fix it? Kind of almost felt like, well, it's fair enough. I do want to fix it. Like, I do want to at least I'm not looking to never suffer, but and I was actually looking to never suffer. Now I feel like I accept that bit more, but it can bring up a lot in the evening. It's that still time, and you come face to face with a lot of things that you can distract yourself from in the day. One of the reasons that I used to eat at night was because I didn't want the day to come. So it was a way for me to prolong my day, because I didn't want to face the morning. And it was like, when I stop eating, it means I got to wind down, go to bed, and start another day. And I don't want to. So to me, it was a way of elongating my night. That's just another one. I don't know that I have any more to say about it. It's just that was something that was true for me.
Yeah. I read a study that was saying they had people with binge eating disorder and they had a control group, and that people with binge eating disorder, when they looked at their ghrelin cycles, their circadian cycles, people who struggle with binge eating have higher ghrelin levels in the evening than control groups. Now, of course, there's cause and effect with all of this, and ghrelin syncs up with our cycle too. But what it also means is that if you are used to binging in the evening, when the evening comes, maybe even independent of how much you've eaten during the day, your ghrelin levels are going to start rising, because our ghrelin levels start to rise in terms of what we expect.
Yeah, totally.
So you're going to experience those higher ghrelin levels as I need to eat, right? Because that's ghrelin's job, is to drive us to eat. So what do you do about that one?
Well, That was totally probably me.
Oh yeah, and me.
I don't have high ghrelin at night. I think you said something like this in a different episode. And I remember thinking to myself, that's so interesting because I used to have a lot of hunger at night. Like that was the time. Granted, fueled by restriction, but even as I recovered, I was still always hungry at night. And I'm not at all. Like now, evening is actually the least hungry time for me, which is so weird. And I do, so it corresponds with what you're saying because I've actually gotten more used to eating in more of the daytime. Like that's when I actually eat the most amount of food. And now my body probably predicts that. But how did that shift? Well, first of all, it took 5 years. You know what I mean? Like well, maybe not that long, but it took years to shift. But it happened by, I think you have to just not, you can't be restricting because that will only perpetuate that, right? So if you're restricting, then nighttime's going to, obviously your body's going to call for the food. And I do have a lot of clients who have said, I'm just not hungry in the daytime though. And it's like, well, that might be because the binges are happening at night. So the body's like, all right, we'll humor you all day, but we know we need to get what we're getting at night then. Redistributing hunger is a process. It is not like you're going to start tomorrow and then you expect your body to catch on very quickly. It takes time and it comes from regular eating. Once again, I think throughout the day so that your body acclimates to it. And that might mean that it will still be sending those ghrelin signals out in the evening. And this is where I think it gets messy because we're like, well, now I'm regularly eating, but I'm still wanting all this food at night. And it's the kind of thing where it's like holding on because yeah, your body doesn't trust everything yet. And it's just being like, okay, we're glad we're eating during the day, but we're still going to like, this is the cycle of what we do at night. We're still expecting that. It's going to take time for everything to redistribute. And in my experience, I think it does. And I think the hardest part is tolerating that interim where you are sort of doing the right things and you're eating regularly in the daytime, but you're still getting those habitual signals basically in the evening. But I don't, in my experience, that doesn't last forever and everything sort of does work itself out. It's just very difficult to tolerate that discomfort in the meantime.
Well, we do know that ghrelin learns our eating patterns and that it's only a matter of it's a matter of a few weeks for ghrelin to start shifting at the times, like from an expectancy perspective.
Really? Only
Yeah.
a few weeks? Because it
Only a few
wasn't in my
weeks.
experience. I feel like
Well, that's
science says
different
things that are different.
when you've got a primal hunger thing going on. I'm just talking about the pattern of spikes with ghrelin as opposed to like how high they are. Because if you have your meals at similar times every day, your ghrelin becomes very regulated. If it's a bit more all over the place, it throws it off a bit. And some people that doesn't matter, doesn't have that much of an impact. But it can just be really helpful if you're somebody who can feel dysregulated around food. Like you say, to do that regular eating, because if ghrelin can then start to be working with your patterns, it's just another thing that can support you to have kind of a more balanced, regular eating pattern.
I want to just read Anne's comment because I know we're coming up on time and it's a good comment. It's relevant. It says, I have a critical voice that tells me I should be doing something useful at night, and another part that just wants to read, eat, watch something. So eating is doing something and also a way to avoid the whole topic. Right. So like if we're just sitting on the couch relaxing at night, sometimes that runs up against our expectations of what is, what we're supposed to be doing, or the idea that resting is lazy. It's another way of looking at like what are our larger belief systems about who we should be. This existential stuff comes up. You know what I mean? And it's really difficult. It's like we want the answer for the acute moment. I find that a lot. I get a lot of questions about like, well, what do I do though in this situation to stop me from doing the thing acutely? It's like, well, it's longer term. Like yes, you can take some strategies for acute ways of dealing with things, but until larger concepts are addressed, including belief systems about what we're allowed to do and how much we're allowed to lay down and do nothing, that is underpinning the whole thing. So dealing with it acutely is not really to the point. It's just a Band-Aid.
To me, Anne's comment ties in with procrastination. That's the procrastination cycle. So, Anne, you might want to visit or revisit episode 89, but I struggle with procrastination because we've done a whole episode on this because, yes, I think it's a popular one. And it's this whole pressure of productivity and we want to feel like we've used our time well. That idea of wasting time is one that even now can make me feel really uncomfortable. If I feel like I've wasted time, And like, oh, if I end up falling into like a scrolling hole on my phone, especially if it's about like 9:30, 10 o'clock at night, and I lose the sort of the hour before I go to bed because I was scrolling and just jumping from one thing to another.
Yeah.
Afterwards, I feel the disappointment of that for me.
I hear that, and it's not, it doesn't always work, but I find this happened to me last night. I scrolled for like 45 minutes and lost those minutes. But you know what? I laughed like 17 times because I have some really funny things show up in my scroll. And I learned some things too because I have a lot of educational content in my, and it's kind of like sometimes to look at what did it offer you? I had a follower message me on the weekend to say, I've just been staring out of my window watching the rain on my recliner for the past 2 hours. I forget what, I think I was talking about rest in my stories. And I was like, you could look at that and be like, I wasted 2 hours in a zone. Or you could be like, what a nervous system relaxer. You know what I mean? Like there's something to be gained from not doing. And it's almost like you can manipulate it a little bit to say, like, what are you doing when you're not doing? Because you are doing something. You are offering yourself something.
For me, there's something about how it feels. So when you describe that person staring at the recliner in the rain for 2 hours, even as you said that, my whole body kind of went like, oh, that's like 2 hours of mindfulness. Lovely, lovely. And I'd be okay with that. However, often if I'm scrolling late at night, it doesn't feel like the way that you're saying it feels for you. What I would like to do is get into bed, put on a podcast or put on like a thought-provoking YouTube video and play on my phone for 20 minutes. That's my switching off. And I like that. I'm listening to something that I have consciously chosen to listen to. I think absorbing short form content, jumping from one thing to another, just doesn't work very well for me. But
I love it.
But I think this is an important point, isn't it? I think with any of these things, really inviting the listener to think, what is it doing for you? And can it be okay? No judgment here, because it can sound like, oh, reading is better than scrolling through your phone. And actually, we can get a sense, if we're checking in, we can get a sense of, is this something that is helping us? Or is this something that is at least trying to perform a function in some way, as food can be in the evenings?
Ooh, I was like, how's she going to tie it back?
I know. I did it.
Whoa, nice.
And the Steph's gone a bit echoey. It's because her microphone is just packed in. But we got through most of the episode, and that is the main thing. So a big thank you to everybody who joined us in the community today. And I will speak to you soon. I don't know who I'm talking to there. I don't know if I'm talking to the listener or you, Steph. But
well,
anybody,
I'll see you
anyway.
I'm not going anywhere. So we'll see everyone. Thanks for being here. Bye.
Bye.